Before the show, a student asked if genocide had ever occurred in America. And one of the ways to think about it is that since the name genocide did not emerge until the 1930s, it really is essentially a 20th century concept. But of course, genocide has occurred before that time and in the United States. Perhaps the most obvious example would be the attempted extermination of the Native American population in America, not only in the United States, but in the Americas in general. But something to think about with regard to that question that I think our panel is well aware of is that in this time of globalization, all genocides to some degree occur in America. That is, as a major power, as a signatory to the UN Genocide Convention that the little film dealt with, all genocides in one way or another impact us and are impacted by us. Judith, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that that there's also a declaration that the United States has signed that requires us to act, to do something when we know a genocide is occurring. So our government should take action to stop that genocide. And that's one of the questions that's happening in Sudan, in Africa these days, is that the United States has said that there is a genocide occurring in Darfur. And yet it continues with very little intervention. It continues.
Do you want to speak to that, Melanie?
Yeah, the genocide is happened in my country, and it's really affect me so much. Even everything I do right now is the reflect of the suffering from that genocide in Cambodia. And so I hope that this is going to be open the chapter for everybody to learn about it and help to heal the person that even in your school, if you meet one, they might not talking about it because this is so hard to talk about it, so difficult, too much suffer.
And oftentimes people don't know about the genocides that have occurred. We don't always know what's happening, not because it isn't reported, but because it isn't widely reported. And we hear so much entertainment on our televisions. But what Melanie is talking about is the Cambodian genocide that occurred over 30 years ago, where somewhere between up to a third of the population was killed, was exterminated by the Khmer Rouge, which was a communist government that came in. And I'm not sure the reasons why that particular, people talk about, well, why does someone commit a genocide? What's behind it? And it often, as Greg has said before, it's not something that is a crime of passion. It's something that is very calculated. And there's usually a small core group of people who decide on genocide as a way to accomplish another policy. For example, taking and assuring their control of a particular area, increasing territory, sometimes an ideology, imposing an ideology to make sure that everybody accepts that ideology. So what's interesting is to think that someone can actually sit down and very dispassionately plan how to kill millions of people. The need to torture, the need to terrorize, the need to round them up. And because one person can't commit a genocide or a handful of people, it takes really a large number within a society to do that. The leaders of that genocide have to somehow get people in the country to kill, to hate a certain group in that society. And so there's a lot, they usually pick a vulnerable group. In the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia, it was the Bosnian Muslims. That was a vulnerable group, and they create hatreds. Well, there's there's some reason that this group is separate, that we might not like them, and so then they use that and they will say, well, this group actually is killing us, or it's taking our resources, or it's overtaking our society. So they create hatred, suspicion and fear among the population, and to set it in motion. But the people who are planning it are very dispassionate and saying, okay, we need this group to, how are we going to actually carry out killing 1 million people? That's not an easy thing to do. So, well, we need this group of people to do it. And it's one of the questions when you're talking about responsibility for genocide is you have to look at all the people that are necessary for a genocide to occur, those who plan it, those who have the idea, those who make a strategic plan, how is it going to be carried out, those who supply the weapons and the ammunition and equipment that's necessary for the genocide, those who give the orders, who pass them on, who tell others, you must kill these people, and then those who pick up the guns or whatever it is and actually do the bloody work, the killing of other people. And I would say, finally, people who don't do anything to intervene, people who stand and watch and are passive. And they may not be legally responsible for genocide, but there is a moral responsibility.
I would say in the film that at the beginning of the show, the last step in genocide was denial. And one of the difficulties of genocide is that it is virtually always denied. That is, it's denied by the perpetrator. That is, we're not committing genocide. And very often, since it tends to be within a nation state, the argument will be that the rest of the world has no business dealing with this. This is an internal matter. And in virtually the studies of every genocide, you run into internal matter. That is, the rest of the world shouldn't step in. And so it's denied by the perpetrator. But it's also, if you will, denied at the very beginning and at the end. One of the big problems with genocide is that there's always somebody denying it. And that denial, after the fact, can very often get stronger and stronger. I mean, shortly after the Second World War, denial of the Holocaust was seen to be just a kind of, swinish, minority opinion by neo-Nazis, etc. But in the last few years, there have been several books by respected Holocaust scholars dealing with the problem of denial. That is, as survivors, if you will, die or disappear, denial becomes more and more possible. Certainly with the Armenian genocide from 1915, there are very few survivors left, and since its inception until today, the Turkish government has denied that it has happened and uses the concept of history, and this is again something that always happens, uses the concept of history to support the denial by saying, look, there are two positions with regard to this, and anytime there are two positions, we can't make any definitive statement about it. This comes up again and again and again in virtually all genocides. Is that?
And
yes.
it's,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not just the perpetrators that deny it either, because when we deny it, that means we don't have any obligation or responsibility to it, because by using the term genocide in its definition, we actually have an obligation to act, because bystanders are going to be held accountable. So when we say in the United States, oh, we don't really know if the Armenian genocide happened, we're also doing that because that frees us of any responsibility. And, there's some states where they're not actually allowed to say that the Armenian genocide took place. When they study history, they don't study it because of that very reason, that the United States denies it as well.
There's an important point on the Armenian genocide, is that when Hitler was planning the Holocaust, when he was planning the massacre of the Jews, one of the statements he is quoted as saying is, well, look at the Armenians. Right. There were no consequences for that mass killing, so he could go ahead. And I think that from what I've seen is that most people in the inner circles of planning a genocide do look to what happened in other mass killings. where there's no response, no accountability, where nothing happens to them, they're free to use that tool. The other thing I'd like to say is that we look at the United States and we look at our obligations abroad, but I think we need to be really careful and also look at ourselves and what happens internally in our country, because there is always the possibility that we could, that another genocide could happen in the United States. Well, all it takes is a sort of a fear in the society, different outgroups, and someone who's seeking power and has no scruples. And what they would do is they would look to who is the vulnerable group that we can make the scapegoat. Well, I would imagine that you all could identify some in this society who could be vulnerable. Certain groups of people of color, gays and lesbians, those sorts of groups could be singled out, and then you build on people's underlying feelings of discomfort and or dislike for that group. And I would say that we all have some of those feelings. We don't all have nice, open, loving feelings towards everybody. So we have some of those feelings because it comes from our culture. But what pushes it over into hatred and action against those people is when somebody in power gives us permission. When they say, it's okay, these people are really bad, and it's okay for you to act against them.
Right. We have someone here who is, in fact, has experienced directly being made a victim, being made a kind of, if you will, group that was signaled out. Would you talk about that a little bit, Melanie?
Yeah, sure. See, I don't really understand why they kill so much people during that time, but I know that they try to eliminate all the educated people. That's what I understand, because my family, 10 children of my parents, only 3 of us that survive. And both of my parents was killed too because they are educated people. And I had to hide myself that I don't know how to read, I don't know how to write. Like, I was the dumb person at that time, just to survive. And there's a lot of, like from 1975 to 1978, this is a mass killing field that I don't know, the outsider didn't even know about it. And we didn't even allow to listen to the radio. We don't have any TV, but the radio we have, but we don't allow to listen to it. So we just live in the blind world, and we cannot communicate to outside either. And I've been through a lot of starvation, illness, the massive evacuation from the country, from the town to the countryside. Can you imagine that the city of Portland, all of a sudden they ask you to move out of your house right away. You cannot even bring anything with you, just yourself out. And you didn't even know where your parent at, where your brother at. I want you to imagine that, how it feels like to be a ghost town. And then without any preparation for that massive evacuation, we're facing with starvation, illness, and it was like nothing to eat for 3 years and 8 months. Skeleton, most of them died because a lot of them died because of the starvation. A lot of them died because they steal just to feed themselves. They torture before they were killed. And many of us that died because they execute us with no reason. We don't know what we did wrong.
Can I say that in virtually all genocides, and I teach a literature of genocide course, and what's interesting is the same problems, the same questions come up. The question, what did we do wrong? What somehow is it that triggered this, which is really very seldom understood by the victims. The other thing is, why isn't the world doing anything? And one of the problems really is communication. That is, especially in major states where communication can be controlled by the perpetrating state. There really is very little information, or at least the information is given in such a way that it can be questioned. It can be kind of called into question. No, it's not really. These people aren't really killed. Yeah, there's a war going on, and in wars there are always victims, etc. This was true of the Holocaust of the Jews, of the Armenians, of the Cambodians. It was, that perhaps less true directly in Rwanda, but the whole use of communication is, I think, key to what goes on in genocide and the control of communication. And just one more point: when you talked about, that the sense in the Cambodian genocide of it being the educated who were in fact victimized, virtually every genocide begins with the educated. That is the kind of beheading of the culture by, the killing of educational, religious, political, social leaders of one kind or another. That is, those who in one way or another might influence the victimized group to act tend to be wiped out first, and then the others are brought along. Is that?
Yes, it is true. It is true, because educate people, they cannot teach them how to do something like this, killing others like that. They cannot teach, educate people to hate one another so bad like that. And, they even teach the children to kill the parent. That's how bad it is. Children kill their own parent because they uneducated. And it's so easy for them to tell the uneducated people that this is the right way to do, this is the right way to do, this is the wrong way to do. It's so easy for them to do that.
Right. Okay, are there questions or comments that we can deal with? Anything at all?
I think in the back.
Yes.
How do I move on? That's a good question. At first, I never think that I can repair myself, what I've been through. I was torn apart. They robbed my life, they robbed my dignity, they robbed my loved one. And I never think that I could repair myself. But and then, when the time comes that I came to the US with my family, I have something to look forward to. It's my children, future. And I put a lot of time and effort to help community, to help other people that is needed. I'm not rich, but I make the most of that I can to help other people. And time too. So we don't think that we don't have time, right? We're so busy, hectic, life is hectic. But I make my own time to work in the community, helping other organizations and helping the poor, not in this country, but on the outside as well. And that make me, that can help me, make me happy. I don't have to think about what is bad going on in my life, in the past of my life. I still think about it. I still dream about it. I still have nightmare. It doesn't go away. And this is my third time by talking about the genocide. And it's so hard for the first time. The second time is still even harder, and I don't know if I can handle it or not. And this will be the third time, and I hope that I will get better from the suffering, and I get healing. And that's how I put is all my effort to help other people that is needed.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I just think, I really want to thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a really important thing. When we think about genocide, all these victims are going to have a choice. And they can either turn around and act out their anger and aggression and pain that they've experienced and recreate that situation, or they can move on and learn a better way. And part of our job as an international community is helping those other communities who have suffered to move on. Otherwise, we're just going to be sitting there with more problems on our hands. And that's really, really important.
I'd just like to say that the trauma that people experience through the genocide, I mean, if you can imagine what it's like to be in that situation for years and have no hope, losing your parents and having nothing to eat, being beaten or raped, and no idea that you're going to make it out of that. That kind of trauma, as Melanie says, it goes on for years. And when people are brave enough to tell us about what their experiences were, they go through that trauma again to a certain degree. So it's very difficult. And I should also say that people oftentimes who try to help those who have been survivors of genocide, either psychological help or legal people who are working legally on the issue, prosecuting those who commit genocide, or even those who are digging up mass graves, that they also develop a certain degree of trauma. So, and journalists who are reporting on it. So genocide has such a wide repercussion. I think the other thing that's so important, and when Greg was talking about revisionism, that we can't allow that to happen, because one of the things that can help heal the survivors is to acknowledge what happened to them, say, yes, we know it happened to you, this is true, and that helps to bring them back within the human community. Because when you are so horribly victimized by people in your own country, people with that power, you feel thrown out of society. You feel you're no longer a part of it. So that's another reason it's really important for us to know about these and to stand in solidarity with those survivors.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and I want to share with you a little bit about my experience, that what I did right now, I reflect to what I have been through. See, like, I separated from my parents. I lost all my brothers, 7 of them that I lost. And right now I have 4 sons. So I cling on to them as much as I can. You know, my husband keep blaming me, why don't you let them move out? You know, I said, they will move out eventually, but right now I had to hold on to them because I miss those things. Before I didn't know that, but the more I talk about my life, I realize that this is what I reflect on what I have been through. And then at work, every drawer of mine, I have all the snacks. And at home too, I buy a lot of food, put in my refrigerator. And first I didn't realize it, that now, the more I talk, the more I realize that starvation. They could eat that, you know, feeling that fear that I will not have anything to eat. Or my family will not have anything to eat. So in my drawer, I have snack all the time. Without snack, I get panic. You know, and this is the thing that I didn't even realize that I'm doing this because they reflect on my past. And one thing I learned is life is precious. I did not really appreciate my life during when I was with my parents, with my brother. I fight with my brother a lot. You know, argue with my parents. But now, I look back, I think life is beautiful at that time. You know, so please hold on to one another and love each other, love your parents, love your brother and sister as much as you can, while you have the chance. See, I don't have any chance. I don't have that chance anymore, you know that.
May I just add one other thing? And I mean, you know, we are aware, and I think we can all imagine the victimization of genocide. We can imagine what it's like for a victim, not over, you know, not clearly, but at least we can kind of put ourselves in that place. We have to remember that the perpetrators, not the leaders, but the perpetrators, are ordinary people too. That is, there's a book by Christopher Browning called Ordinary Men about one of the Einstein's group, or one of the liquidators of the Jews in the ghettos, and about who these guys were. And they were family men, they were people who were really ordinary people who were coerced in one way or another, little by little, to perform these acts. And one of the things, I mean, I think it's important to caution people about is to say, look, I mean, I can imagine that I could be a victim, but one of the things you have to imagine as well, try to imagine, is that given the right situation, it would be possible, as it happened to so many people in so many genocides, to become a perpetrator. And that exactly is what has to be avoided at all costs. That's why awareness, I think, of genocide is so absolutely important in every society.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. There was a young man who came and testified at the trial of Slobodan Milosevic. He was one of the perpetrators. He'd been, he was in his early 20s when he was conscripted into the military service. And they ordered his group to Srebrenica, and when they got there, then they gave him the order. They said, you know, we need you to exterminate this group of people. There were 1,200 people. And he said, no, I won't do that. And they said, well, then you can join them. And so he picked up the gun, and for 4 hours, he shot person after person after person. He killed 100 people, men and boys, who he had no hatred for. And when he put down when they finally finished killing these 1,200 men, his commander said to him, well, now we need to go over to another place and kill 500 more. And he said finally, no, I won't. And they got other people to do it. But he was a broken man. He became, you know, he went through an emotional breakdown. And he was able to somewhat put himself together again by telling what happened. And it's very powerful coming from one who has done it. So you can't deny that that's what happened when you have someone who participated saying, no, I was ordered to do it and I did it. And I think it's important for all of us to think about what would we do in that situation when it's our life. You know, they're saying either you kill all these other people or you die.
Or your family dies, too.
Yes.
I mean, it can often go beyond the individual.
Exactly.
Questions?
Is there a logical way to stop genocide?
Well, I mean, it's hard to, I mean, again, that's a very hard question to answer. There are lots of efforts, but I think really the only way that is really possible is to make people aware of it and aware of the kinds of insidious steps that often lead to genocide. I mean, you know, this is what discrimination is all about. That is, and one of the steps in genocide is to discriminate, to, if you will, define one group, and it's always a group, as somehow different from the other group. And I think if one of the things we can do is, I don't think we'll ever completely get rid of it, but at least be aware of and minimize discrimination. That really is a kind of first step toward, if you will, again, the elimination of genocide. It's easy to say that. Unfortunately, it has a very, very long history, and human beings often aren't very nice.
Another piece of that is that I think can go towards helping to prevent it, and Melanie alluded to this by saying educated people. I think that alongside that is you need people who are independent thinkers and who have a moral sense. People have gone back and looked at who during the Holocaust hid Jews, you know, who risked their lives to hide a Jew, you know, to do those sorts of things. And you think, what would I do if in the middle of the night someone comes to my door, I have 3 children, and they say, can you hide me? I'm desperate. And you know that if you take them in, and if you're discovered, that you and your children will die. You know, those are the kind of decisions. And what they found is that people who had just ordinary people, they had a sensibility that you help people when they ask. And without thinking about it, they said, yes, come in, you know, come in. And that's another thing I think that we really need to think about. We don't talk about ethics and morals in those sorts of senses, which are really critical.
Yeah.
When genocide is discovered, whose job is it to stop it?
Well, according to the UN, I mean, to the Genocide Convention, it is basically initially the discoverer's job. That is, one of the things that a nation agrees to, and these are nation states that do it, a nation agrees to is, in fact, not only the recognition but the prevention of genocide, which means that that nation is supposed to step in. Unfortunately, that has too often been an excuse for not recognizing genocide. I think the most obvious case may have been the Rwandan genocide, in which while it was going on, while there were in fact live shots of people being massacred, generally with machetes, etc., the spokespeople for the State Department asked, is there genocide going on in Rwanda, would say things like, well, there are genocidal acts, but whether or not it is specifically genocide is really beyond my power. There has to be more study, etc. In other words, genocide is all too often only recognized after the fact because there is a responsibility to react to it. Is that?
I'd also like to add that, before the Holocaust was ever stopped, there were years and years and years of people saying this is not right, and they called them screamers in the United States particularly. And that says a lot about personal responsibility, that after a while, if enough people start standing up and saying, we will absolutely not take this, we will not fund any companies that are going to be, investing their money into militaries that are going to be killing people, we refuse to participate, our government is eventually going to have to listen. And they said in the case of Rwanda that if at least 100 people would have contacted each representative, that there would have been so much pressure on our own political parties that we would have stood up and done something. Today that might be a little different. Maybe it's going to take 500 of us contacting each representative. Who knows? But that means that we have to stand up and say this is not okay. We will not accept that. And that means that each one of us are actually personally responsible.
Yes.
What is the United States doing today about genocide?
Go ahead.
It's been an interesting path, if you will. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of commitment to actually fund money for refugees and protection and that sort of stuff. But the follow-through has been lacking. And, we're in a certain political situation that it's kind of dangerous for us in the international community to step out on our own and do something about what's going on in Sudan at the moment. We've been trying to pressure the United Nations to do something, but again, our relationships are so complex with each different country that, we're having Sudan over and asking them about terrorism and how we're going to work together on terrorism. And then as a side note saying, oh, by the way, we don't like what you're doing by killing all the people in Darfur. And so I would say that people are receptive. We have, the Congress, they're listening. The ears are open, and there's people that are actually very passionate about ending what's going on in Sudan right now. We have to capitalize on that and really make sure that our promises are followed through and make sure that our commitments that we made are actually taking place.
May I say, too, that the UN is a wonderful organization, but it also, in some ways, makes it difficult to deal with genocide because so many governments will say, let the UN take care of it. And the UN, in actual enforcement, is pretty much a paper tiger. I mean, it can sanction a government, etc. But as happened again in Rwanda, there was a Belgian UN force went in, primarily Belgian. 11 Belgian soldiers were killed, and the entire UN force pulled out of Rwanda and let the genocide take its course because their orders are always simply defend yourself. You can't somehow go in and take direct action. That happens very, very seldom. It did in the former Yugoslavia. That's one place where the U.S. did take some action, but as the U.S. rather than the UN. Very late in the game. So often, again, genocide is recognized only after the fact. When Bill Clinton could go to Rwanda months after the genocide ended there, give a 20-minute speech in the airport, and used the word genocide 11 times in that 20 minutes, whereas during the course of the genocide, the word was never used by the U.S. government because it would have demanded some sort of immediate response. Yeah.
Because the genocide thing is such a horrible thing, why does it have to get to the point of us being able to say, this is genocide for us to take action? Why do we let it get to that point so we take action?
It's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Take action beforehand.
Absolutely. And we need to build structures to do that, but that's true. And if we look at what happened in the former Yugoslavia, which I'm most familiar with, they knew before actual genocide occurred. The leaders were saying things like the Bosnian Muslims must disappear. And a number of the international leaders were quoted as saying, yeah, we're really worried what will happen if they actually free themselves up from being restrained by international opinion to a certain extent, because these people are really capable of carrying out genocide. They knew it. So you're right. There needs to be early intervention of some type. And the difficulty becomes which are situations that you can foresee that genocide is going to happen, that some outside power needs to intervene, and which are situations where the outside power is saying, I want to go in there because I have certain interests, and genocide isn't necessarily going to happen, or there isn't mass murder, but I'm going to go in there and say that it was, and take over that country. So you have to. That really requires us to be aware of what, and it's very difficult because those we get information from can't always figure that out. The journalists and various political leaders. So, but I think that finding good sources of information. It's wonderful to have the internet because it's not all filtered through corporate media, and you can access a lot of information from groups like Amnesty International, like Human Rights Watch, and those sorts of things. And they are watching. They go in around the world to every country. Human Rights Watch issues a document every year that goes country by country to say what are the human rights violations. And the UN does something like that. The US does too. But they do that, and so it's possible for people to follow that. And Human Rights Watch, you can join these organizations and stay up on what's happening, and they will tell you, it's time to press someone on this issue, or this is the action that we can take on this issue.
Do you have something to say about that?
I don't really know much about how to prevent that genocide either, because it's happened in a country and which is so hard for the outside world to know, because they block it. They won't let anybody know about it until things have been done. It's too late. But it's a thing that can help those victims that they still left over. Have them heal, have them to stand up on their 2 feet. And there will be an event on April 28 at PSU. It's called Khmeru Tribunal Forum, that sponsored by Cambodian American Community of Oregon. So if you guys want to know more about those, there will be a lot of guest speakers who are survivors too on that day. So please join.
But let me say I think one thing that can be done, and that is, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, keep close tabs on your representatives in government. One of the problems with genocide is that, our government always has other kinds of agreements with the governments that are involved. For example, we knew about the Holocaust early on, but we're worried about the interest in the Holocaust and the concern about that getting in the way of the prosecution of the war. And it was decided that the war had to be won before anything could be done about the Holocaust. We always have trade agreements, etc., with different countries, and very often those are the countries that are performing genocides. And in one sense, we'll ignore a genocide to make the trade agreement work in one way or another. These are things that all work through our Congress. And the one place where we have some control is over who we elect to the positions that will make the decisions on what comes first, what takes priority.
And I'd also like to say, if you're not old enough to vote yet, don't think that gets you off the hook. Because I actually walked in, I have a 12-year-old cousin that went to me to Washington, D.C., and we sat there in the representative's office, and they listened to her more than they listened to anybody else. And they were so floored by the fact that there was a 12-year-old telling them what was up, basically, in their office, that they really respected that. And not only that, but she came from a community that wasn't really represented. She was from Eastern Oregon, and so they said, you know, hey, she's outside of the normal typical population, and if she's coming to me, that means that there must be a lot of people that are outside of the normal box, I guess, if you will. And so just because you're not 18, just because, you know, you might not feel like you're part of the political process yet, doesn't mean that you don't have some power.
I'd also like to just talk briefly about the international tribunals. There have been a number of what they call ad hoc tribunals. So for the situation in Rwanda, they set up a tribunal afterwards to try those most responsible. For Yugoslavia, they did the same. They're working on something in Cambodia, and they have been for a long time. Sierra Leone set up a different kind of tribunal. And now what has been passed is a permanent criminal tribunal, an international criminal tribunal, to look at just genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And they will do investigations of not things that are, you know, things that are ongoing, and be able to go in and prosecute the leaders. I mean, there's a lot of things to work out, but what's important is that one, it's not the greatest solution, but it does play a part, because people who have considered genocide, who have considered doing that sort of thing, take that into consideration. There's a lot of proof that says that they do. If they're going to get caught and spend some time behind bars or being held accountable, then they're going to watch what they do. And so those tribunals become really important for deterring other leaders, other groups that are thinking about taking power in really illegitimate ways and committing genocide.
And one problem, though, with the tribunal is that very often the major powers don't sign on. I mean, the United States, for example. The United States, Turkey, Israel are powers that will not sign the authority of those tribunals.
Which is another way that we can impact the whole issue, is because we can press our representatives to sign the International Criminal Court Tribunal. There are like 160 countries in the world that have signed the treaty to establish an International Criminal Court. The United States signed and then took back its signature. So it's really, there's some indication that there's a little bit of leeway now, but it's really important for people to become aware of what is that International Criminal Court, and then to press our representatives to sign that, to make that a reality, because the United States is a power for good and evil. And if the United States signs on, then the International Tribunal has more power.
Yeah.
Where is the line drawn where it becomes the difference between mass murder and acts of genocide? Because I know that in Rwanda there was a period of months after we discovered that there was some serious killing to the Hutu and Tutsi, where the leaders of the UN met and they sat there for months just trying to decide, is this really an act of genocide? And I'm wondering, how can we really feel good about ourselves when we sit there knowing that millions of people are being killed, trying to decide, well, is this worth us going in and stopping?
Yeah, well, I mean, the irony, by the way, in that particular case was that the head of the discussion, the leader of the discussion, it happened to come around to be Rwanda's turn to do it, and the head of the Rwandan government was the leader of that discussion, and who was a Hutu, who was part of the perpetrating government. Again, you know, there's no absolute line. The line is a decision made by a society, just like the perpetration of genocide is the identification and acting on genocide, it seems to me, is a line, a position that simply has to be taken. One might even argue, in some cases, quite arbitrarily. Because, of course, if you wait around to be sure whether it's a genocide or not, it will be after the fact when it is finally decided.
And just to add that there is a legal definition of
Yep.
genocide. It was shown in the video. And that's what international powers will go by. So you have to show that mass murder or some other form of mass destruction, ways of trying to destroy a people is going on. So there's a crime. You have to just say there's a crime. And then you have to show that that crime has been committed with the intent to destroy that group in whole or in part. And it has to be, the group has to be either racial, ethnic, national, or religious. So it's not political, you know, those sorts of things. But those are the categories they have to fall in. Somebody has to have identified a group for those reasons and then be able to say, well, this mass murder is being perpetrated against them for that reason, where they intend to destroy all of this group or part of it. It becomes difficult in two ways. One, what's a part of a group? How many do you need? If you wipe out 70% of people in one town, and this group is throughout the country, is that a substantial part of the group? You know, in Srebrenica, they found that it was, that in the area of Srebrenica, that's the population that they looked at. But in other places, they'll say no. You know, more people were forced out of that country than were killed, and so therefore, it's, you know, it isn't a substantial part. The other tricky piece is the intent. How do you show somebody has the intent to destroy a people? You know, people don't usually, genocideers don't usually sit down and write out an order, kill all these people. So you have to look to the circumstances to see what the intent is. Well, okay, 70% of those folks are dying, and they're all seem to be Bosnian Muslims, you know, or Tutsis, or whatever it is. That's an indication, you know. The fact that that there's hate speech, you know, that people are saying, as they did in Bosnia, we need to make all of those Bosnian Muslims disappear. You know, so you look at those sorts of things. You have to look at the circumstances. And then you have to know that, again, as Greg said, that states and governments will, you know, they'll play that. There's a lot of room for interpretation. And so they'll say, well, it's not a big enough part of the group. We don't know if it's genocide. It's a civil war. They don't really intend to wipe out these people. They're terrorists. They're attacking the government, you know, all sorts of things. So that behooves us then to find out through Human Rights Watch and Amnesty and those organizations what's really going on there, and then advocate with our representatives.
I think we're kind of running down on time. So if we can take maybe one more question, and then final statements from people. Yes.
Hearing what you guys are saying, I was kind of thinking, is the United States and genocide going to happen? We have freedom of religion, Ku Klux Klan, hatred towards people, gang violence. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that's a very perceptive question, and that in most countries there is a genocide potentially waiting to happen. So, and certainly in the United States, though, what we often do is say that can never happen here. Well, they said that in Bosnia, you know, that can never happen here, and it does through the ways that we've said. Somebody, you know, that society becomes fearful, it becomes upset, you know, that all of the regular sorts of things that are happening, which is the United States right now. There's a lot of fear, you know, and then unscrupulous leaders can look at that and say, how can we use that to maintain our power? And what they'll do is exactly what you said, is they need to find a scapegoat group. And they'll say, these people are the responsible ones for our, you know, the Muslims, for example. The Muslims are all responsible for, you know, our fear and our jeopardy these days. So we single them out, and then we start working with that until it builds to a genocide. So it becomes really important, as we said earlier, to look at the discrimination, look at who those groups are that are singled out, and inform ourselves so that we can deal with our own prejudices, because we do have them.
Sarah, anything you'd like to add?
No,
You're right at the end here.
I think about covered it. Just because we have these prejudices doesn't mean that that we're absolutely going to have a genocide. That's why it's all of our parts, really, to make sure that we keep what we have in check and really work to reconcile.
I think a life precious that we need to learn to love yourself, love one another, and get out there, do good.
I think, again, the potential is there in every culture, in every society, and again, awareness is what allows us to recognize the potential and to, in fact, get rid of it as much as possible. Okay.
And I just like a closing thing. You are all so important to this, because you're at a time in your lives where you're not preoccupied necessarily with raising, I mean, some are maybe, but raising children, doing all the things that people get involved in to try to keep a life together. You're still in at the age where you are moved passionately by things, that you can take in that information and be outraged, and you're not jaded yet. You're not, you won't say, well, yeah, this always happens, there's nothing I can do about it. You can affect your society. You can certainly affect the adults in that society, and all your passion and knowledge is really needed.
If I can speak for the panel, and thank you very much for your attention, for your questions, for your concern, and you know who we are now. If you have questions in the future, I'm sure all of us will be willing to talk to you at any time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.